In today's world, the topic of juvenile incarceration is a widely debated issue, given the fact that according to the National Economic Bureau, a staggering 70,000 juveniles are incarcerated in the U.S. on any given day. This caused my group to come up with the question of to what extent does juvenile incarceration in detention centers impact delinquency in children? And after conducting further research, we found out that incarcerating children is an ineffective method. Now on to Sophia, who will further discuss the historical aspects of it.
So in order to fully understand this issue, one must understand the United States historical policy and approaches toward this. So in about the early 1900s, the U.S. implemented a juvenile justice system and then included new trials for them and new facilities. However, these approaches have been ineffective because they've had a lot of shifting back and forth. What happens is a lot of public perceptions change based on arbitrary events, and then it forces or influences legislators to change their policies so that they can get reelected. So a lot of congressmen are looking in their best interest and not the interest of the public.
So now that we understand exactly what juvenile incarceration is, we need to explore what the issues with incarceration are. So one of the main issues is that when juveniles are incarcerated, they experience extremely poor conditions. A study conducted by the Bureau of Justice Statistics, which is a part of the U.S. Department of Justice, discovered that 12% of youth, when they are incarcerated, experience sexual abuse, mainly from staff. A similar study from the National Center for Juvenile Justice, which is a research-based organization, discovered that 34% experience unnecessary force from staff. This map really exemplifies how abuse just runs rampant in juvenile detention centers. All of the many dark green states are places where abuse has been clearly documented since 2011. So this is clearly a widespread issue. So because of these poor conditions, juveniles have long-term negative consequences. For example, a study in the Quarterly Journal of Economics found that when juvenile delinquents are incarcerated, they are 23% more likely to recidivate or commit additional crimes upon release than if they were not incarcerated. So clearly, incarceration is really doing little to nothing to help these youth grow from their delinquent past and making sure that they don't commit additional crimes in order to protect public safety. The study also found that incarceration decreases the opportunities of graduating from high school by 13%, which of course will lead to a host of economic problems for the juvenile's life. This chart summarizes both of those statistics I just conveyed. As you can see, recidivism does increase and graduation decreases. Now Ali is going to explain how all of these problems really expand to the entire community.
Juvenile incarceration causes a huge economic strain. According to the Brookings Institute, it is estimated that juvenile incarceration costs a person $240 per day to incarcerate, which amounts up to $88,000 per person per year. This is a large investment by local and state governments, this money which could have been used on investing in other things that would have benefited the community as a whole, such as education. In fact, juvenile incarceration does not significantly improve public safety as commonly thought, as many juveniles are actually detained for nonviolent crimes, while states needlessly still spend $5.7 billion per year in total incarcerating them, according to the Justice Policy Institute. As the first image depicts, the cost of juvenile incarceration is much higher than education, which could have had a larger impact in reducing youth crime, encouraging employment, and thus increasing public safety, as Nikhil previously expanded on.
So the first solution that people have proposed, although our group does not endorse this solution, are harsher punishments and harsher approaches toward juvenile justice. And this would include more scare tactics and more harsh punishments such as solitary confinement as seen in this photo. However, this has been proven to have harmful psychological consequences and also does not solve the problems of abuse in prisons, and it does not solve the economic strain put on the justice system currently.
So after dismissing the previous solution, we chose to look at another solution, a policy measure called the JJDPA, or the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act. It was originally authorized in the 1970s and was most recently reauthorized in 2002. And according to the original legislative proponents of the act, its goal is to improve the experience of juvenile incarceration by providing federal funding and outlining 4 core protections for juvenile detention facilities. So some implications of this is that it is a targeted response to the biggest problems in juvenile incarceration today. One of the 4 core protections deals with minority overrepresentation, which, as you can see by this graph from the Connecticut Judicial Branch, is a significant problem, particularly among Black and Hispanic populations. Furthermore, as Nikhil mentioned earlier, it helps solve recidivism issues, as described by the Washington State Institute for Public Policy, a division of the government of the state of Washington. Finally, it also decreases the chance of abuse and assaults, both by other inmates and by staff members, an issue which Nikhil also discussed. According to Richard Mendel, the author of several notable publications on juvenile justice. On the other hand, there are several specific limitations of this issue, the foremost of which is, as it is a policy, it requires political approval. As I mentioned earlier, the JJDPA was last reauthorized in 2002, and organizations such as the Act for Juvenile Justice organization have been attempting to make its reauthorization an issue again. However, reauthorization efforts were most recently shut down this past October, showing how change comes very slowly for bills such as the JJDPA. Furthermore, after the federal funding runs out, it's very difficult to control implementation of the JJDPA. And once federal funding runs out, states are required to find their own federal funding, and some are simply unable to do so. Furthermore, as my partner Ali touched on earlier, the JJDPA does not solve any economic issues caused by juvenile incarceration once the federal funding runs out.
So our third solution, which we suggest for communities in the country to take up, are community-based alternatives. Community-based alternatives can come in a variety of forms, and their main goal is to significantly reduce the amount of children incarcerated in facilities by removing a lot of the misdemeanors offenders and putting them in community-based facilities that are more home-like, as seen in this picture. So it tries to implement more skill-based things and learning to help these kids rehabilitate, and it also tries to pair with their community and with their parents or pre-existing mentors. And the 3 main examples of this that are most commonly used are functional family therapy, multidimensional treatment foster care, and multi-systematic therapy.
So the implications of community-based alternatives in comparison to juvenile incarceration are positive. In fact, it is more economically sustainable. According to the Justice Policy Institute, it is reported that programs such as multi-systemic therapy and family function therapy, as Sophia has previously mentioned, have been shown to yield up to $13 in benefits for public safety for every dollar spent. Furthermore, in fact, community-based solutions that are based on therapy solves issues not addressed by juvenile incarceration. According to a study conducted by the National Center for Children in Poverty, it has been found that of the 47% of children that are detained, 47% have not been met. I'm so sorry. Let me just rephrase that. In fact, In fact, community-based solutions that are based on therapy solves issues not addressed by juvenile incarceration. According to a study conducted by the National Center for Children in Poverty, it is stated that 47% of children that are detained have not met with a counselor. Furthermore, as the infographic depicts, community-based alternatives have been found to reduce the recidivism rates in comparison to juvenile incarceration, which shows that community-based alternatives are more financially conservative, effective in the reduction of rearrest, and contribute more greatly to public safety.
Though we feel that this is the most logical solution, and it is absolutely the one that we recommend, there are a couple limitations. For example, if you view this chart from the Pew Charitable Trust, especially on the far right, you will notice that as the severity of the crimes of the juvenile increases, the ability of these community-based alternatives to appropriately deal with them and reduce recidivism significantly decreases. So this large limitation leads to significant pushback from people such as Harriet Salerno. Harriet Salerno is the co-founder of the victims advocacy group Crime Victims United of California, and in an interview with journalist Christina Lyons, she reveals that she is opposed to alternatives for this very reason that I just explained, because she fears for public safety. So as we continue with this solution, people such as Harriet Salerno are going to make it very difficult to fully implement community-based alternatives to the extent that we want to. Another issue was, as Ali explained earlier, 70,000 juveniles are incarcerated on any given day. So this huge number means it is going to be very difficult to make such a drastic change to the system as we are recommending.
So, in conclusion, the current system for juvenile corrections and juvenile delinquency holding is extremely ineffective and unsustainable for the United States in the long run. So we recommend community-based programs, and they have the most promising success as they have been piloted in states like California and New Mexico. So it is also everyone in the community, as well as the country's responsibility to get involved in initiative and referendum and research the current bills in their states and find out what the best solution for their community is. Thank you.
Uma, how did your team's research question evolve as you moved through the research process? Did it go in a different direction than you had originally planned or hypothesized?
Actually, from the very start of this assignment, we were considering doing juvenile incarceration. But the way it developed was that initially we were just looking at juvenile incarceration as a whole, including juveniles charged as adults and juveniles incarcerated in juvenile incarceration facilities. And as we did more preliminary research, we got to see how broad the topic was, and we also got to see the specifically in juvenile incarceration facilities, there are some problems. So we decided to narrow our focus just to juvenile incarceration facilities. And going along with that, we also considered looking into the solitary confinement aspect of juvenile incarceration, but again, after our preliminary research, we chose to move away from that as we thought it would make our topic too broad.
Okay, thank you. Sophia, describe a disagreement or conflict that your group dealt with and explain how you overcame that obstacle.
So in the beginning, as Uma earlier said, when we were kind of struggling how specific we want to get within this area, Nikhil was a very strong fighter for solitary confinement, and he did a great job of finding a ton of support and research for it, but then the other three of us thought it was too specific. So we kind of toggled with that for a couple days, figuring out whether it's worth trading it in for all that, and I'm sure it would have worked the same, but graciously Nikhil decided to let us continue on this route, and then it provided a whole avenue of other things to look into, such as like the psych abuse within there, the economic sustainability of it all, and it also allowed us to focus more on juveniles, because if we had gone the route of solitary confinement, it's a very, we have to do the entire thing, and that would include adult prisons, and it's also been lowered lately, so there's less recent statistics and things about that.
Allie? Describe an argument from one of your peers' individual research reports that made you think differently about your team's solution or conclusion.
That's a fantastic question, and I would like to reference Uma's argument. She came up with the solution of the JJPDA, and me, Nikhil, and Sophia, as us, the three of us, we did not think of that as a solution originally. We were focused on community-based alternatives. However, after getting insight from Uma and collaborating with her, it allowed us to think in a different direction, and it allowed us to understand that there are more than one possible solution.
Okay, thank you. Nikhil, if you had more time, what additional research would you conduct related to this issue? What advice would you have for other researchers who consider this topic?
Yeah, so I would definitely want to look more into the psychological aspect of incarceration. That was something that we unfortunately had to leave out of our presentation and out of our research for the sake of time. But there is a wealth of information out there regarding how incarceration affects juveniles psychologically, and also on the flip side of that, how the psychological issues with juveniles lead to incarceration in the first place. For example, I think we all came across the idea of how juveniles' brains are not fully developed, and for that reason, a lot of people are arguing that incarceration is not the appropriate way to go about corrections in crime, because it's treating them like they can't be changed. So that was one main argument, and Uma was initially planning on looking at that with her research, but we were unfortunately unable to do that just for the sake of time, like I mentioned. And if I could give some more advice to future researchers who want to look into this topic, I would really recommend looking at a wealth of studies from both historical and current times. As Sophia pointed out, there is a whole amount of history behind this issue and how we got to where we are today. And I think it's extremely important that future researchers really acknowledge the history of this whole thing, and that they see how the history of incarceration compares to how it is today.
Thank you.